Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Weather and Climate Chat with Monsoon Mike Regensberger and Dr. Michael Davis. Dr. Davis, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. So finally, some real fall-like weather. Maybe even a little, I don't want to say the word winter, but it's going to be pretty chilly this weekend. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, it's supposed to be chilly. Temperatures dropping maybe below freezing. We're looking at a potential hard freeze or our first frost over the weekend, and perhaps even in some areas further north of here, our first snow shower.
Interesting. How are those snow showers lake effect oriented, or is that from a trough, or what is that from?
It's coming in with the cold front, which will be happening this weekend. Because the ground is relatively warm still, and we don't have that much in the way of cold air to facilitate that heavy snowpack. Most areas are probably just going to see a flake or two, a coating if you're lucky, at least in Pennsylvania.
Still enough to get you in the mood for the winter season.
Yeah, if you want to go up to like Ontario or Quebec, you're going to get more like 12 inches.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, very good.
At least according to the GFS model, which, well, you can say what you want about that model, but it's forecasting.
I guess the most important question is, what does the Canadian model say for that, since you're talking about Canada? Or did you look at the Canadian?
The Canadian model does exist. I don't really look at it very much, not so much as, say, like the European or the American models.
Right.
But I haven't looked at what the Canadian model is calling for that.
We might have picked our topic for later in the show about the actual models, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, so very cold this weekend, hard freeze. If you have any tender vegetation out or anything, cover it. Or, I mean, at this point, probably most people have, most things have died off or whatever, but I guess this is a good weekend. Whatever's left to cover it over.
Yes, or just go out and harvest as much as you can.
Right.
Like I got my tomatoes and peppers and whatnot that need to be brought in my garden.
So you're ready to go. So temperatures this weekend, I saw some of the models look like we might knock it out of the 40s for highs on Sunday, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
from what I've been seeing, like upper 40s, but the sun will be out.
Yeah, it'll be a nice looking weekend, maybe just not so nice feeling.
It's just that nice, cool, crisp air that you would be getting in autumn, which it is.
Which is really, what we should be seeing. So,
but then warmer temperatures next week.
Yeah, it looks like we rebound nicely and maybe even back up to a little bit above normal. I mean, this time of year, what should we be? About average, low to mid 60s, about average?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So next week I saw some upper 60s, maybe even close to 70 again. So we might be back above average. So it just seems to be the roller coaster of autumn 2015.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of ties along lines of it being generally warmer than average for this October. I mean, we have this cold shot, but we've been generally above average.
Yeah, this good cold shot might tend to balance it out a little bit when all is said and done at the end of the month, but I think we'll probably still end up a little bit on the high side of average.
Yes, I would say so. And then November, I believe, is looking pretty much about average temperature-wise.
About the same. Okay. So that's pretty much what to look forward to. No big storms on the horizon to look forward to that I see.
When we start looking out very late next week, the GFS model was showing a tropical system potentially around Bermuda. Another one trying to come in the Gulf of Mexico.
Interesting.
That's still a very long ways away. The models need time to refine themselves. So I'm not putting much stock into it at this point, but it's interesting that the models are depicting those tropical systems.
What's been the history of storms that form a little bit late season in that particular area? Does the precipitation from them tend to affect us in any way, shape, or form, or not? Just history-wise.
More or less, I'd probably say it depends on where the track's actually going. Like several years ago, we had coastal low pressure that formed over North Carolina, went right up the coast and brought us that foot of snow that we had before Halloween.
I remember that.
I think it was 2011.
Yep.
And even Sandy, because next week or 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, we're approaching the anniversary of that too. Yeah,
that's when Sandy was coming on shore, because it was right before Halloween, and they were calling it the Frankenstorm at that point, along with the holiday season, I guess. And that was devastating for the region.
Right.
We saw heavy amounts of flooding, heavy amounts of damage to trees and property, and people were without power for weeks.
Oh, yeah. I know people that were affected in that particular way. So basically the moral of this story is end of October can have surprises.
Yes, that's all because of the jet stream pretty much wildly fluctuating now as
Right.
it's going to its winter location further to our south, allowing more colder air to come down.
Right. Now, I saw our friends at the National Weather Service are now out with their winter prediction. AccuWeather came out with theirs a few weeks ago. National Weather Service came out with theirs. They're not being like blatantly, it's going to be a warm winter or a cold winter, but their map does paint us in the how do they word it? The higher probability of above average temperatures. It looks like for our area,
And that's pretty consistent with an
Yeah.
El Nino winter for the
Right.
Northeast.
It doesn't have us like in a hugely higher probability. I know how it goes, like 33%, 66%, and so on. I think we're like 33% chance of above normal. So they're not like dead set that it's going to be a blowtorch winter, as they say, but leaning that way. Looks like.
And then my students on Wednesday told me that the Weather Channel came out with their winter storm name list.
I did. Oh, geez, already.
I have not looked into that because I find naming winter storms to be preposterous.
Thank you.
And absolutely ridiculous. There's no
And they're the
reason-
only people that seem to be doing it. I mean, we'll be in the middle of a snowstorm. Every other person, every other forecasting outlet's just saying our nor'easter or our snowstorm, and their winter storm
Nemo.
Emo. It's like, what?
When you hear Nemo, you don't think a winter storm that's dropping a foot and a half of snow. You think about the fish from the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of respect the Weather Channel for what they do, but that's just like the lamest thing, and I'm surprised they haven't gotten enough pressure to stop it. But they're continuing it. They're continuing it.
If I can stay on my soapbox for a little bit.
Go for it.
They say that they get positive responses from it. I would like to see all these positive responses.
When I'm on their Facebook page, I see negative responses.
And everyone that I tend to talk to in the meteorologic community think that it's stupid.
Not even meteorological community. I mean, I've seen people with zero experience in weather on my page laughing about it. So I'm not sure where this positive response is coming from, but I think it makes things more confusing. I mean, you turn on the TV for coverage of a big blizzard and Nemo is coming at you. It's like, what? Nemo, the fish, coming at me?
Exactly. And I could understand maybe they're trying to feed off of the hurricane
idea,
naming system that we have. But hurricanes and winter storms are two different animals,
right?
And you're not going to remember every single winter storm that happens.
Right. There's way more of those than there are hurricanes. Plus, the hurricane naming system has been around for a long time. Everybody uses it. National Weather Service, Weather Channel, AccuWeather, you, me, the guy down the street. Nobody else other than the Weather Channel uses this winter storm. This is just their own thing. So,
well, if we're looking for a topic for today, I could talk about the naming history of hurricanes, how it came about.
We can do that.
The 1940s, 1950s, when we started to learn more about what was going on at sea. We had more ships and whatnot through the World War II and more interests in maritime affairs. These largest storm systems were named typically for female names because vessels back then were like, oh, she's a fine vessel, very seaworthy. And so the female names dominated.
Right.
Just yesterday was the anniversary of Hurricane Hazel that came through, and that was 1954. And during that time frame, it was all female names. But then the 1960s, 1970s came around, and the feminist movement started to occur and said, you know what, we're kind of sick and tired of having these destructive storms named only for women.
Valid
Men
point.
are just as bad.
Valid point. Yep.
In some respects. So
yep.
Therefore, you have male names that were then introduced, and we alternate male-female names every year. And it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, and so forth.
So that's how it happens. So when did they stop using just female names and go to a mixture of both? Roughly 60s?
I'm going to say mid-70s.
Oh, mid-70s? Okay.
But I'm not entirely positive on that.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned Hazel. That's actually one that I actually have a family member that was affected by Hazel. My mom was alive then, and she lived in northeast Philadelphia. And back then, of course, weather forecasting was obviously a little more rudimentary. And, nowadays you say a hurricane's coming in all the schools, everything is shut down, government offices. Back then, everybody went to work and school like a normal day. She said she was in math class or something, and all of a sudden the mother superior, she went to a Catholic school, runs in the room. Sister, we've got to clear out the school. We got a hurricane coming. They just said it on the radio. So my mom walked home her normal 10 blocks or whatever it was, and she said by the time she got home, the wind was blowing so hard, she literally had this sounds painful, but she literally had branches and twigs like in her eyes that her mom was picking out by the time she got home.
Yeah,
So
but
there's Hazel.
Hurricane Hazel was a Category 4 and made landfall. That's
Yep.
the strongest Category 4 to ever make landfall that far north in North America.
And Philly got hammered pretty good with that one.
And it even went up to Canada and
Yeah.
gave the area around Toronto quite a bit of rain. They had torrential flooding there. And that story kind of reminded me of the Galveston hurricane back in 1900, where we had pretty much no warning that a storm was coming. And there was a hurricane that hit Galveston Bay, and it remains the largest natural disaster in U.S. history.
Right.
Because no one was expecting that hurricane to come in. It just completely blindsided them.
I heard it. I don't know if this is an urban legend or if this is true, but I heard it. The only warning that they had was that the sky was mysteriously red that morning. And you've probably heard the old folklore of red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. Mm-hmm. And there is some truth to that, because I think the red sky in the morning is formed by the clouds moving in and reflecting off the clouds.
It has to deal with where the clouds are and atmospheric moisture that's in the atmosphere.
So apparently there's some old, you can look it up, there's some old urban folklore that the sky that morning was like really weirdly red, and people are like, what is that? And then right after that, the hurricane hit. Mm-hmm. So there you go. So that's how far we've come in a century or so.
And now that we have satellites and more sophisticated computer models, it's much easier to forecast what a hurricane might do. There's still room for improvement, as you and I have plainly seen, but we've come a long way since the 1900s, definitely, and even the 1970s.
Do you think there'll ever be a time, and maybe we don't want it to become that, a weather forecast like you, maybe we don't want it to be a time that this would happen, because it would kind of take away the experience of forecasting a storm, but do you think there'll ever be a time, maybe 50, 100 years from now, when these models can nail it exactly where it's going to go? Or do you think there'll always be that room for error?
I would certainly hope that we are making continued strides to nailing a perfect forecast. I don't see why not.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something magical about the guessing and prognostications about what exactly the storm is going to do. But whether we see that maintain itself over time remains to be seen.
We'll just have to wait and see.
It also depends on how well the government wants to fund scientific computer models and their progression to get even more powerful to crunch numbers left and right to get the data correctly outputted.
And that's kind of the other topic that I was starting with a little bit. We have another couple of minutes. We could just quickly touch on that. There's all kinds of computer models out there, like the GFS American model, the Euro model, the Canadian, even smaller, less looked at models like the Japanese model and stuff. So these are all models that various countries put money into?
Yes, different countries put more money into it depending on how well they want to be funded and how fine of a resolution you want. Some might go more of a coarse resolution, which would be maybe several degrees by several degrees. Others may go more fine one. But the issue, if you go more fine, is it requires more algorithms to be run, and you need a higher computer speed to run those models efficiently. Otherwise, you're going to be making a model output for something that may already happen.
Right.
In fact, the very first weather forecast, if we go back to when that first occurred, you had this whole group of mathematicians sitting together and said, we're going to forecast pressure. It's just one variable for 6 hours out. 2 days later, they came back with the forecast, and it was some absolutely ludicrous number that made no sense.
That's funny.
And this was the 1920s, 1930s, somewhere around that time frame. I forget offhand, but it was very early in the meteorological formatting time frame.
Interesting.
And now we've come to pretty much nailing temperatures 6 hours out relatively easily.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the easier things. I do have to ask you, though, quickly, a lot of times in the weather world, we'll hear the meteorologists and hobbyists like myself joke, King Euro, we call it King Euro. And I think a lot of that comes from a couple of years ago with Hurricane Sandy, talking about perfect forecasting. Euro nailed that location of Sandy. It was like spookily accurate. It had like where it hit in New Jersey was like a couple miles from where it had said it was going to hit like 7 days prior. Was that a coincidence, or are the Europeans putting more money into their models?
The Europeans are putting more money in the models than what the Americans are. Around that time was also the talks about the government shutdown.
Right.
So you had the defunding, or at least a restriction of funds, the sequestration, I believe it was the term, that the National Weather Service was not being paid. NOAA wasn't being paid.
Right.
So that time frame it just highlighted the fact that the government was not funding weather research as well as, say, the European agencies were.
Right.
And therefore, the Europeans continued to advance while we stalled out.
Right.
So perhaps they were more
a little ahead of us then,
sophisticated than what we have at our disposal right now.
But I think I heard in recent years the GFS has been tuned up a little bit. Is that true?
Yes, that is correct. We have the supercomputers capabilities that were just, I believe it was last year, might have been 2 years ago, in which we have pretty much doubled our output.
Good.
For computer capacity, at least processing speeds. So we are starting to catch up on the Europeans, but they have a pretty sizable lead on us.
And where does the Canadians fit in there? I know they have their own model too, the CMC. Does anybody look at that? Are they investing any money in that?
I don't know exactly what the funding situation is with the Canadian model.
Right.
But the Canadian model is looked at, but it's generally more if we're going to have a storm starts to affect like maritime provinces like Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, that way. The meteorologists here in America don't really look at that very much. It is a model that they may consult for just to see where the storm and whatnot is doing, but they tend to kind of go with the GFS or
not
the
take
European
it too seriously.
more.
Yeah. Well, good.
But who knows? Maybe in a few years that'll change.
Yeah. And I know there's even other smaller models that you hear about every so often, like a Japanese model. You know,
you have the French models, the Italian models, the German models, the Danish models.
Interesting.
Even the Chinese models.
Interesting. I guess that's all part of those spaghetti plots that you see when you have this hurricane coming. Well,
and generally speaking, if you have a storm that's approaching a country, the country of origin is the one that usually is more familiar with the geography and whatnot, so that's one they probably more heavily rely on.
Absolutely. Well, we had no trouble filling up a segment here. We always, come in not knowing what our topic's going to be, and then it just happens, and it did again. So, so cold weather this weekend, bundle up, harvest your vegetables or cover them up or get ready for them to probably not make it through the weekend if you don't do any of the above. And then slight warming up next week again.
That's what it looks like.
So we'll reconvene next Friday and talk to you then.
Bye.